Hello, and welcome all to Movie Hunter, the show that tracks down the quality of all sorts of movies. My name is Hunter, and today in the 18th episode, our target is The Amazing Spider-Man 2, produced by Columbia Pictures, Marvel Entertainment, Agad Productions, Matt Tolmatch Productions, and Ingenious Film Studios, and distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 began writing while finishing up the first. As the film was being made, plans were made for a third and fourth sequel, and multiple spin-offs including a Venom film, a Carnage film, and a two-part Sinister Six film. Unfortunately, the cinematic universe owned by Marvel Studios wanted to get Spider-Man in their movies, but being owned by Sony, there was obvious trouble. Despite the plans to create their own universe of movies revolving around The Amazing Spider-Man, Sony and Marvel reached an agreement to allow the two companies to create new Spider-Man films within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and led to the cancellation of all subsequent Amazing Spider-Man sequels. However, this film released before all that, on March 31st, 2014 in Tokyo, and on May 2nd, 2014 in the United States, just under 2 years after the original. Mark Webb returned as the director, and James Vanderbilt returned to write the story alongside Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, and Jeff Pinkner, who also wrote the screenplay. Obviously, it is based off of the comics by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Avi Arad and Matt Tolmatch returned as the producers. This is also the first theatrical Spider-Man movie in which Laura Ziskin wasn't a producer, due to her unfortunate passing in 2011. Pietro Scalia returned as editor, and Dan Mindell returned as was the cinematographer. The music was by numerous musicians made up of Hans Zimmer, Pharrell Williams, Johnny Marr, Mike Einziger, Tom Holkenborg, Steve Mazzaro, and Andrew Kaczynski, a group credited as the Magnificent Six as a reference to the Sinister Six. The cast sees the return of many actors including Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Sally Field, Campbell Scott, M. Beth Davids, Dennis Leary, Max Charles, and of course Stan Lee. The cast also includes Jamie Foxx, Dane DeHaan, Paul Giamatti, and Colm Feore. The film made $716.7 million on a budget of $200 to $293 million. Upon the film's release, the reviews were similar to that of Spider-Man 3, in that the reviews were mostly mixed and occasionally negative. Although, similar to Spider-Man 3, the film has a group of fans claiming that the film is much better than it was originally received. It was nominated for 13 awards, of which it won 3 of. The film starts off with a flashback to Peter as a child being dropped off at his aunt and uncle's place, similar to the opening of the first film, but this time we then follow his parents instead of him. They get onto a plane that gets hijacked and the plane crashes, killing them, but not before they're able to upload their research to something somewhere. We then cut to the present day and see Peter fighting crime as Spider-Man, and just narrowly making it in time for his high school graduation, which reveals to us that he is still seeing Gwen despite her father's dying wish in the last film. We then see Peter talking with Gwen about the guilt he feels doing so, and Gwen breaks up with him because supposedly he goes back and forth with this constantly, and she can't handle this constant indecision. Meanwhile, Peter's childhood best friend, Harry Osborn, comes into town to see his dying father, who reveals to him that his disease is genetic and that it will eventually kill Harry too if he doesn't find a way to cure it, giving him all the research done on the illness, as well as appointing Harry as the new CEO of Oscorp. We then follow a man named Max, who Spider-Man saved in the opening, as he goes about his day, now obsessed with Spider-Man and hoping that he will remember his birthday and come to see him. When his birthday doesn't go as planned, with no one at his job at Oscorp particularly caring or treating him with any kind of kindness, and is required to work overtime to fix some electrical equipment, he falls into a pit of electric eels who bite him, turning him into Electro. Peter then meets up with Gwen per her request, and she tells him that she might be moving to England should she receive a scholarship to Oxford University. Electro then appears in Times Square, and Peter has to leave Gwen to address the issue. At first, Spider-Man and Electro are able to talk things out, but upon being fired at by the police, he causes a power surge and Spider-Man has to stop him, getting him put in the Ravencroft Institute to be contained. Meanwhile, Harry pursues the mystery of his family's illness, discovering that spiders were manufactured by Oscorp to try and cure the illness, but were mysteriously disposed of, and Harry deduces that these spiders are the reasoning of Spider-Man. Harry asks Peter about this, requesting that Peter get Spider-Man to give him his blood, given that Peter takes his photos for the Daily Bugle. Peter is hesitant to give Harry his blood as it might have unintended consequences, and, as Spider-Man, denies Harry his request, enraging him. Harry is then framed for covering up Max's accident with the electric eels by Oscorp's vice president, removing him as CEO. Peter, desperate to learn more about his parents, discovers a secret subway station which reveals to him the research his parents did, learning that they worked for Oscorp, but denied Norman's request of making biogenetic weapons with the spiders they made. Realizing that Oscorp would make them disappear, Peter's dad injected his DNA into the spiders so that Oscorp couldn't use them without him, and they left, leaving a young Peter with his aunt and uncle. Harry, more desperate than ever and learning about Max's incident, frees and teams up with Electro and is able to gain access to the venom of the spiders. He injects himself with it, but it turns him into a goblin-like creature. Peter, upon learning that Gwen got the scholarship, confesses his love for her and promises to move to England with her, with them working together from here on out. Just then, Electro causes a power surge and Peter goes after him, with Gwen joining him given their new agreement, and they are able to overload him with power, killing him. Harry then arrives as the Green Goblin, and the trio have a climactic fight in the clock tower, in which Harry reveals that he knows Spider-Man's identity and swearing revenge on Peter for denying him his blood. Harry takes Gwen to the top of the clock tower, dropping her. Peter catches Harry and leaps after Gwen, shooting a web towards her that attaches to her, but reaches her mere seconds too late, with her head smacking the floor, killing her. Peter quits being Spider-Man after this, and Harry, now in prison and being cured of his goblin transformation, where he is visited by someone and they discuss beginning the process of forming a team, starting by giving the criminal Peter fought in the opening a rhino suit. Peter, after watching Gwen's valedictorian speech, is inspired to be Spider-Man again and confronts the Rhino, the film ending with the combat about to start. I suppose the best place to start is with Peter himself, or rather Peter's parents, because apart from Gwen Stacy, Peter's parents are really the only thing Peter has going on, keeping in mind that I consider Peter and Spider-Man two different talking points. As I mentioned in my review of the first film, Peter's parents, I thought, were an interesting idea that didn't get enough focus on to warrant being considered good or bad. I mentioned in that review that I liked how the original trilogy kept Peter's parents largely unmentioned to amplify the strong relationship between Peter and his aunt and uncle. Luckily, I didn't think that bond was lost in that film. However, I didn't see the purpose of having Peter's parents so largely presented yet, and correctly predicted that the second film would utilize them more. Now that we've gotten to this point, I can officially say that, unfortunately, I don't think that Peter's parents were well used in this film. In the previous film, it gave Peter that extra motivation for the injustice he was feeling, but now there just isn't really a purpose to it at all, and at worst, actively derails the main story. Firstly, I think that the main purpose it has to the overall story is to show the shady things happening at Oscorp. The problem here is that message is already clearly conveyed through Harry and Electro, who are much more important to the main story. Secondly, this plot really takes away from any screen time given to Peter, again apart from Gwen Stacy, and as such there is no real lesson or takeaway from this. There is a nice mini-plot in which Aunt May becomes distressed by Peter's obsession with his parents and confesses that she feels like she isn't doing enough to fill the role of both his parents and now Uncle Ben, too. But unfortunately, this plot is very minimized and would have made the overall plot leagues better if simply utilized more. Finally, and perhaps most unfortunately, I think that Peter's parents' secret really counters the main idea of Spider-Man. One of the best things about Spider-Man is the idea that anyone could be behind the mask. Anyone can be Spider-Man, or rather what Spider-Man symbolizes. But by having Peter be the child of this secret scientist who put his DNA into the spiders, making Peter the only one who would have the Spider-Man result, really takes away from the idea that Spider-Man can be anyone. Because now, at least on a surface level, they can't. Only Peter can. Overall, I wouldn't call this plot bad, but it does have unintended consequences, and at worst can be occasionally distracting and largely uninteresting. The next logical thing to talk about, I suppose, would be the other half of Peter Parker, Spider-Man, as well as Gwen Stacy. I combine these two topics because I find them very connected, as Spider-Man's story largely ties in with Gwen Stacy. Firstly, I really like how this film addresses the strange ending of the first by not just having Peter and Gwen be together again. Instead, they are together, but Peter feels deep remorse and guilt about Gwen's father, who he made a promise to stay away from Gwen to keep her safe. He sees him every time he sees Gwen and is frightened that if anything should happen to Gwen, he would never be able to forgive himself. I really like the scene in which Peter goes to break up with Gwen, but then she reveals to the audience that this back and forth thing has been happening for a while, because it really shows the amount of stress that lays on Peter's mind about this. He loves Gwen, but could never really live with himself if he got her killed. You come to feel bad for him, and also for Gwen, confessing that she can't live with this constant back and forth and deciding to break up with him first. Then, in the second act, Gwen requests that Peter come join her, and this part is pretty good too. They hang out just as friends, but it's clear that they mean more to each other than that. But unfortunately, the issues are still there. Gwen is moving on to bigger and better things that require a certain amount of predictability that Peter can't provide. This is exemplified when Peter has to cut the conversation short to go confront Electro. Finally, the best and easily most tragic part of this is the end, in which Gwen gets accepted into the school in England, and Peter confesses his love to her. He says that he will follow her to England, and he agrees to be there for her life of craziness, as she is for his. And the finale seeks to put that to the test. When Peter and Gwen arrive, Peter begs her not to go with him. Gwen declines per their recent agreement, but Peter webs her to a car to keep her back. It is at this point it becomes clear that Peter is still in the same scenario as he was in the first act. He wants to be Spider-Man and also be with Gwen. He wants to have his cake and eat it too. In the scenario of having one at the cost of the other, he chooses both. This right here is one of the cores of Spider-Man that I really love. The dilemma of juggling two lives, an impossible task for one human that we've all been in with various responsibilities, and having one that, willingly or not, needs to sacrifice for the other. Peter tries to have both, but by pushing Gwen away, while still keeping her, she only comes back more determined, and in the moment of truth, dies at the clock tower. This is such a tragic scene that I've seen played in short clips numerous times, but only in finally being able to sit down and watch the entire film do I fully understand the weight of. Peter leaping after her and shooting a web at her, the close-up of the web looking like it's forming a tiny hand reaching out, the web grabbing Gwen, but the immediate realization that it wasn't fast enough as Gwen's head makes contact with the floor. Simply put, it is a tragic scene to watch unfold. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has a lot of problems, as we'll get into in a minute, but this is not one of them. Peter and Gwen's relationship is really well juggled in the mix of all the other plots going on, and manages to tell a compelling and tragic story. The ending of this I feel to be a bit rushed, with Peter's depression and eventual return to Spider-Man. Given that this is the ending of the film, it really doesn't have time to go into another large plot, so it pretty much just shows the main ideas, which is unfortunate. I just think that Peter's return to Spider-Man feels really quick as a result, despite the fact that it really shouldn't. Other than that, though, really good plot of the film, easily my favorite. Now for us to discuss the part of the film that feels like the biggest downgrade from the other Spider-Man movies we've covered so far, the villains, Electro and Harry Osborn. Whereas Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Sandman, Venom, and the Lizard were all largely some of my favorite parts in their respective films, Electro and Harry just don't have that same weight to them. Let's start with Harry, as he is easiest to identify the problems with. Harry, quite simply, is the plot that feels the most like it didn't have a point. The film already had a villain, it already had connections to Oscorp thanks to the first film, and worse of all, it makes the other plots feel shorter due to the number of plots that just barely crosses the line of absurdity thanks to this plot. Harry also just feels shoved into the plot last minute because he is introduced as Peter's childhood best friend, despite not being mentioned at all in the first film, even though Peter directly interacts with Oscorp numerous times, and also because he is extremely similar to Harry in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. They both request Peter bring them Spider-Man, basing the fact that he knows him personally because he takes his photos, which is not how taking photos works, by the way. Both wanting revenge on Spider-Man, and ultimately becoming Green Goblin because of this. Harry just does not add a lot to the film. There's interesting ideas with him struggling to suddenly be the new CEO of Oscorp and facing the eventual doom of his illness, but neither of these things have time to be fully realized. Then there's Electro. Electro, or rather Max as he starts out, is just strangely written more than anything else. He starts off as a super fan of Spider-Man after Spider-Man saves him, and then goes under the assumption that they're practically best friends now. What's strange is that this unhealthy train of thought never gets brought back up again. And what's even stranger is that when he becomes Electro, the tone of the scene where he confronts Spider-Man is really off. Logically, Spider-Man has no reason to start fighting this guy made of electricity for just walking around, and Max has no reason to just start destroying stuff. So the whole scene is just awkwardly building up to the point of them doing those things, because that's obviously where the story needs to go, despite it not really making sense. After getting defeated, Electro and Harry then team up, and Electro fights Spider-Man in the finale, who then overloads him with power and he dies. That's it. He's just dead. There's no time to bring it up or ever mention it again, though, because it's now Harry's turn to attack. So there's no reason to ever bring it up again, ever. That's just how his story ends. How am I even really supposed to criticize it beyond that? I don't know. The villains aren't necessarily bad, but they do not reach the highs of the other villains. Even Venom in Spider-Man 3, who at least had a cool design and helps the main plot of the story in a unique way. Electro and Harry are the most going through the motions aspect of the film. It seems like the train of thought was just, Spider-Man needs to fight bad guys, Electro and Green Goblin are bad guys, so let's have them fight. There's no substance to it beyond that. Before we close, I'd like to take a minute to look at how this compares to the other Spider-Man films we've reviewed, as well as discuss the future of Spider-Man reviews on the channel. I think that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 ranks 4th place of the 5 films, right above Spider-Man 3, and right below The Amazing Spider-Man 1. It definitely has its merits that surpasses even the original, but that only makes up about half the film, and that's perhaps generous to say. There are other aspects of the film that I enjoyed uniquely to this one, though. I think that this is the funniest Spider-Man yet. I love the opening where Spider-Man stops the criminal in a runaway truck, and when he sprays Electro with a fire hose, and he does so with a firefighter's hat on, and afterward high-fives one of the firefighters. The film also takes a lot of unique steps. The results of those steps disregarded. I appreciate the effort. I certainly enjoyed the film a lot more than I expected to, given the film's reception. At the same time, though, this film had a lot going through the motions moments. They're, that are a result of the film, but also brings into conversation a larger issue we are arising upon: where to go from here. Logically, it makes the most sense to review the Spider-Man films starring Tom Holland. The problem there is that it is connected to the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe, and as such, I am quite sure that they require knowledge of the MCU to properly review. So there's the question: do I just go straight to the Spider-Man movies, or do I start reviewing the MCU and reviewing the Spider-Man films along the way? I am as of yet undecided, though I may choose to review the two Spider-Verse films in the meantime. It might be nice to review some other superhero movies for a change, but this is also quite a large undertaking. Of course, another route I could go is review one of the various Spider-Man TV shows. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. I give The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a 7 out of 10 for having some bad qualities, but in the midst of it all, tell a really compelling story between Peter and Gwen. The film lacks a lot of what made the previous ones work, namely the villains, and this film also lacks a well-paced story to keep me engaged the whole time. With that said, though, it is definitely a shame that the cool sequel projects that they were working on all got cancelled. It would have been really cool to see how an Amazing Spider-Man universe would have played out, but what we got is nice enough. A lot of people really like this duology, and while I don't completely agree with them, I do think that it is a criminally overlooked pair of films, and definitely worth at least one watch. Who knows, maybe it'll become your favorite Spider-Man. Well, that's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to share any opinions you had on the movie. A new episode releases each week, so stay tuned to see which film I cover next. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.